Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I am your host, JJ Kitchen. Man, it feels like it's been a long time since I've done a video. I think it's almost been, or at least been a couple of weeks. Life has been crazy to say the least. Just in my career and everything like that. Just been so busy. Haven't really had the chance to hop on here, and I think really this week, as we hit really Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I'll be doing a number of videos. Obviously, today talking about spring practice. We've already gotten through 7 practices to this point, but also too, it's going to be nice to do an episode on the recent string of commitments with Pitt football right now, and currently Pitt football within in the top 15 in football recruiting. It's been a hell of a month in March. I think most fans would kind of agree at this point. Is this March or is this June? We're not really sure which one it is at this point. But it's been exciting. And you're seeing that positive momentum of Pitt winning 20 games in back-to-back years. That is a really big thing. I've talked about that before, especially when the season ended, but even as we went into the offseason after the UCLA game where Pitt beat number 18 UCLA, as they went into the offseason, especially with how many starters were missing, you're seeing that positive momentum. But one thing I really want to start off with first, and it starts always at the top. That's where it really begins in any athletic department, in any university. And before we get into spring football, you got to acknowledge Heather Lyke winning Athletic Director of the Year. I can't even begin to explain how important that truly is, not just for her, but obviously the University of Pittsburgh. When you go back, and obviously I did a video on this, and I'll probably repost it. I know I did a couple days ago, but I did a video about a month ago talking about describing one word of what Heather Lyke's done in her tenure so far at the University of Pittsburgh, and one word was special. I think it takes a special person to take where Pitt was to where Pitt is now. Especially too, you had the Scott Peterson. Just an absolute, just not Scott Peterson, but Peterson, just a huge debacle. The one thing he did was obviously get Pitt out of the Big East and go into the ACC. But then you had Scott Barnes come in, and that was another hire where you looked at it, really just tore down the basketball program. Obviously, he didn't hire Pat Narduzzi, but inherited a good situation where Pitt was still growing. Pitt certainly hadn't achieved anything yet, anything of sort of note, but it was in turmoil. She came in here into an athletic department that was near last. When you look at the Directors' Cup, which really marks each university where they are in the standings as a complete athletic department, Pitt was near the bottom. There was really nothing to be really satisfied with. Obviously basketball being horrendous. Football and the time that Heather Lyke got here had one good season, then they had a 5-7 season. You really had to question where the athletic department was going. But as we sit here today, March 28th in 2023, Pitt finishes in the top 5 in the Directors' Cup standings for athletic departments due to multiple national championships within the athletic department, but also too the ACC championship game, the ACC championship win from the football program, but also too the revival of Pitt basketball here in the winter going into the spring, and just what Jeff Capel's done now in his 5th year at Pitt is to be understated. To this point is incredible. Where Pitt is currently, and especially in the times that we are currently in right now. When you have realignment going on, attractive brands, where is each university going? Pitt's in a damn good spot right now, and I think that they continually grow and continue to show that they're going in the correct direction, and they're really an organization that people really want to have around. People are starting to understand what Pitt's about now. Pitt's back in the national spotlight again, winning 20 games in 2 years. You're seeing it in this year's recruiting. Especially just in terms of rankings, being in the top 15. Can't remember the last time Pitt's been in the top 15 in any portion of the recruiting rankings, whether it's in the beginning, middle, or end. what she's done has been incredible. She has retained coaches. She has signed great coaches, but also applied patience. I think when you control the controllables at this point, what can you control? And really comes down to patience. You can't really dictate what these coaches will do, which ones will work out, which ones will be in your favor. If we looked at it, you know, I see a number of things in terms of the athletic department in general about how people owe, like for instance, Jeff Capel an apology. He came out off firing this year, which I agree he came out firing, but you have to understand the first 4 years of the Jeff Capel era were pretty bad. They were pretty bad. There was nothing to really have a motor about, especially collapses in the second half of games, not being able to sustain it. There were blowout losses to teams you shouldn't lose to. It started off that way this year, where there's a couple of games where Pitt really lost that they should have never lost. But you saw the development of this basketball program as the season went on, almost being really a shot away from winning the ACC this year against a great Miami team that is now in the Final Four. So you look at Pitt and where it's going and what she's done, the consistency of when she's been here. You look at all the revival of the athletic programs. The major additions into donations. The one thing that's been really the Achilles heel during really I've been a Pitt fan has been the lack of donations. And you look at it for rightfully so. I mean, you had no leadership, lack of leadership, lack of winning. You're not going to be able to really attract anybody. But right now, Pitt athletics is thriving. There's no reason why the fans are not contributing, are not donating, are not going to games. Whether it's basketball, football down at football down at Acrisure Stadium. We're going into another year where it's another hot slate schedule. The first game is against Wofford. It kind of warms you up. You have the new guy coming home, Phil Jerkovic, but you have Cincinnati, the renewal rivalry of Cincinnati. That's crucial. Pitt's going to Morgantown to face West Virginia in the second year of the return of the backyard brawl. There's a lot to look for. There's a lot to like. And just where this athletic program is going is really no end in sight in terms of where can this go. And I really do believe, and I've said it before, one's lucky. Two, you're starting to prove something. Three, now you've made a consistency. And right now for Pitt football, they're entering a third year, 2 consecutive years of at least 9 wins or more. Again, 20 wins in 2 years. But now you do it in a third year where you win 9, 10, even 11 games again. You've now established yourself in 3 consecutive years that you're now one of the top tier teams in the ACC. And also, too, just in terms of Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh market, you're really starting to compete with getting more and more people and establishing more of your brand with the younger crowd and creating new fans. I think that's just not talked about enough. Creating new fans, bringing more people into the fold, growing your audience, growing your attendance in numerous games or numerous sports. And that has everything to do with Heather Lyke. Heather Lyke has done a phenomenal job. Obviously Chancellor Gallagher, as he winds down in June, it'll be his last month, and then Pitt begins their search for a new chancellor. You can bet your bottom dollar. Heather Lyke, Jeff Capel, Pat Narduzzi, they will have their say on who goes in there, as that's crucial in this portion of time. That athletics is important and it needs to be funded, and it continues to go where it's going as Pitt continues to develop the teams they have now, but also the facilities. A $250 million facility, a part of Victory Heights, is now beginning. Whether it's coming up here in the next couple months, officially a groundbreaking ceremony will happen. Pretty much it's all being cleared out already right next to the Pete. But you look at the facility upgrades in general all the way around, you're north of $500 million that's really been invested into upgrading the facilities, which rightfully so. If we really look at Pitt's facilities for where it was, in the last couple of years, before Heather Lyke got here, it was really mediocre. The Fitzgerald Fieldhouse was a place that, been there since 1930, 1940. That kind of stuff needs upgraded. You gotta stay in front of that kind of stuff to especially compete with other teams. These new facilities are going to be able to compete with anybody in the country in any conference. It doesn't matter if it's the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12. It doesn't matter. You can compete anywhere now due to the investment in the athletic department. But as we look at it now, we talked about where Heather Lyke is taking this, but where we are now is spring practice for Pitt football currently right now. And it's kind of nice to be able to do a little bit of a recap after 7 practices, because kind of like where we see where we are. And right now, my vision of Pitt football here and through 7 practices and 1 scrimmage this past Saturday, as we sit here on Tuesday afternoon, is really positive. You want to be able to have a positive view where you have Frank Signetti recently talk about the job that Jonathan DiBiaso has done in terms of being able to coach the quarterbacks, because they have a completely different quarterback room than the previous year. You have Phil Jurkovec, Christian Veillard, and Nate Yarnell really competing for the starting job this coming season. And to be quite honest with you, those are 3 really good options. 3 very good options. Last year, you looked at it and you saw Keaton Slovis come in. You had Nick Patty. But in the springtime, Frank Signetti talked about it and said, Nate was still hurt. He wasn't even really an option at this point. We didn't know who he was. So you really had 2 quarterbacks. This year, you have 3. I think anybody who reads the room, watches this thing from the beginning to end, will know right now that Phil Jurkovec is the clear front runner, the projected starter as we sit here today. In my opinion, Phil Jurkovec will be the starter going into the season, but things can change, of course. But that's how I see it. And I think right now, Christian Veillard, Nate Yarnell will be in his second. Nate Yarnell will be in his second year. Christian will be in his first year. Phil Jurkovec will be in his 3rd year in this system. And you kind of see that in the way that Frank Signetti talked about how he really just knows the system. He knows the calls. He knows the terminology. He knows the lingo when he's out in the field. And it's fast for him. You're playing at a high speed. And you saw some of the flashes, especially during the highlight tapes, whether it's from practice or from the scrimmage, where Phil Jurkovec is throwing deep balls and it looks good. Bob Means making great plays, and you're watching a guy like that in his 2nd year in this offense, 3rd year playing wide receiver, and how well he's developed. Kanate Mumfield out there doing a good job continuing to develop. I think he will actually have a really breakout season this year because of the quarterback play being much improved. Dejon Reynolds, the wide receiver transfer from Florida, has done a phenomenal job as well. That's really your top 3. And I think right now, as it stands, Lamar Seymour, for a guy who's a true freshman, he's currently sitting at number 4 right now with some other guys in the fold. And we'll see what that continues to look like as the wide receiver room continues to develop. But even, you talk about the wide receiver room, but the quarterback room, Frank Signetti was highly talked about. But Pat Narduzzi, one of the things he talked about in the recent press conference is just talking about Phil Jurkovec's outgoingness, leadership. I think the key word there, leadership, talked about the lack of it, whether people agree with it or not. In Pat's eyes, I think we can all agree, Keaton was a great kid, no matter what. I heard nothing but good stories about him. I just think he was more of a quiet guy. wasn't the most dominant figure in terms of leadership. Phil Jurkovec is a complete opposite. He's going to get in people's grill. He knows how the offense is supposed to look. If you remember in his first year, in the COVID year, you had the 2020 season, Frank Signetti in his first year at Boston College with Phil Jurkovec. Phil, after his first year in this offense in 2020 at Boston College, for what they had at that time, obviously you still had Zay Flowers. You had Butler up there who played wide receiver. You really had 2 guys and then a strong running game. Phil Jurkovec was projected to go in the first round after 1 year at Boston College. Unfortunately, he couldn't go to the NFL draft because he was only what, I think he was a redshirt sophomore, but it was only 1 year. Goes back to Boston College, struggles a little bit due to one, lack of protection. I think the offensive line play, really these past 2 years for Boston College haven't been good, which really contributed to the injuries that Phil Jurkovec had. So one of the things you'll look at this year is, one, can Phil Jurkovec stay healthy? When Phil Jurkovec's healthy, he's a hell of an athlete and a guy that continues to produce. He produces when he's healthy. And I think it kind of helps a little bit now. He's in his own backyard, trying to have a lot of guys behind him. Hometown hero. You just look at it in general. This is a guy that can really step up, and I think he's going to have really a hell of a year. I think he's going to finish strong. He'll be a guy that does enter the NFL draft, in my opinion. Just from some of the footage that we're seeing, especially too, just the comfortability in this offense. Just the pro style system, West Coast offense is something that's really good for him. I just think under the tutelage of Frank Signetti and Jonathan DiBiase, how they train quarterbacks is how they train quarterbacks in the NFL. So, and people are going to start to really see that. I think Keaton, which just had really issues with confidence after the concussion. I'm not sure he was even remotely even healed from it. Because you saw the Tennessee game where he threw for over 200 yards in the first half against Tennessee. What would that have looked like if he'd have stayed healthy? Only, we'll never know, and only time will tell what he does at BYU. But things happen for a reason. I think it's going to be a really damn good year for Phil Jurkovec. And God forbid he does get hurt, you still have two other options behind him. Another name that's really been I've heard about a lot since he's gotten here, but really since practice has started, is Derek Davis, the running back transfer from LSU, and of course the hometown hero from Gateway. He's having a great camp so far. I mean, he's doing a really good job. He's a 6-foot guy, over 200 pounds, lean, muscle, runs very aggressive. That's kind of the stuff you want. And he'll be a really good complement to the starter this year with Rodney Hammond. You look at the 1-2 punch there, and then you have Sebo Flemister coming back. Again, you'll have three legitimate backs. I think Daniel Carter will continue to step up when he needs to, especially in short yardage, goal line. I'd like to see him get a couple more carries here and there. It's just a very deep room for Pitt. Pitt has continued to develop and continued to recruit the running back room extremely well. Overall, I think the offense continues to get better. If you, from everything I've heard, especially in terms of you look at this team in the second year, people really need to understand the first year under Signetti. That was a very positive experience. Now, you can talk about play calling, certain plays, it wasn't explosive, whatever. And that has to do with quarterback play calling, all in all. I think it's all collectively a group effort. But you got to realize, too, it was the first year. The first year in the Mark Whipple offense was, pretty bad. I mean, one, there was no running game. They couldn't move the ball, 3 and outs. I mean, it was just major issues. But you saw that progress happen in year 2. If Frank Signetti's offense looked like that in year 1, where they won 9 games, imagine what the hell that's going to look like in year 2. As we sit here today, I look at Pitt and say, they're a 9-3, 10-2 football team. And that's what the guys they have currently on the roster. Right now, I would think, I know for a fact that Pitt is for right now looking for another wide receiver in the transfer portal, but also too a potential tight end as well, just for depth. Tight end depth behind Gavin Bartholomew and Carter Johnson. You want to have at least 3 guys there. I think you'd want a more experienced wide receiver to match up with Kanate Mumfield, Bob Means, and Dejon Reynolds. Get that 4th guy in there, and then have Lamar Seymour as your 5th guy. And then potentially what do these true freshmen do when they get on campus? We'll see. But the offense in year 2, I think, is going to look really damn good, and they're doing a really good job in camp. You're hearing nothing but good things, and that's the positive thing you want to see, especially in year 2. What's it going to look like? Well, everything out of camp so far is really good. Now, today's practice didn't really have the greatest form of effort. Guys, whether it's just they're tired or they're just not focused. I think it's more of just not being focused today. You'll have that kind of step back every once in a while. You're not going to have a perfect day every day in camp. Your goal is to achieve perfection each and every day in terms of just being focused and where do you need to be and speed. What are you doing in practice? But at the end of the day, you're not going to have a perfect day in practice every day. And what today's was one of those days on a Tuesday. And Pat Narduzzi reflected that a little bit in his post practice press conference. But on the defensive side, we get a lot of young guys coming up, and I think that you're mixed in with young guys and veterans. The defensive tackles. Obviously David Green, a very good leader, a guy that's going to have a major role this year. You'll see him get a lot of playing time this year. Danielson, again, another guy who's a veteran. He'll do a hell of a job. Tyler Bentley, he'll do a great job. You'll have Elliot Donald. He's been having a great camp as well. He continues to establish himself. And even Sean Fitzsimmons. Heard a lot about Sean Fitzsimmons and what he's done. Consistency, effort is always there. A guy that's willing to learn. He's like a sponge at this point and for how much he's taken in. But also, too, one of the guys that was mentioned as a true freshman, a guy that's really starting to step up for a guy that's as young as he is in this type of defense, where schematically you got to be in the playbook and just understanding terminology, where alignment is, technique. Charlie Partridge is the best defensive line coach in the country, and that's really Ghost. Isaiah Neal, the true freshman from the 2023 class, has really stepped up this year. I think that for a spring practice, they talked about a guy when you're really 7 practices in, you're pretty much halfway through, your first spring, and the guy really hasn't hit the wall yet. The minute he got here, they talked about, it was kind of funny. David Green talked about in his post practice press conference was, hey, this is a guy that just got in here immediately. He got in here. Blake Zubovic, who we've had on the show here, talked about how he's just dove into the playbook, understands schematically where he needs to be, the effort's there. I personally believe he's going to be a potential captain down the road just because of who he is and just the kind of leadership he does have and the positivity. He'll be a guy that'll be there for a long time. In the linebacker room, obviously you have Shane Simon, the projected middle linebacker that'll start. And of course, you'll have Bengali Kamara at the star position, Solomon DeShields at the money position. Those are guys that we'll see, in general. I think that'll do a good job, and they'll be the projected starters. You'll have Brandon George behind Shane Simon. But those guys, I think, really are just all interchangeable. I think these guys they're coached and developed so well. They can play any position. You're always trying to get the best 3 on the field. And Ryan Manilak, the linebacker coach at Pitt, has done a phenomenal job. A guy that's been in Pat Narduzzi's defense, played for him. This is the type of thing where, hey, they've done a good job. They're developing these guys, teaching. And Pat Narduzzi recently just talked about it today, talking about when an NFL guy comes in and they talk to some of these players as seniors, it's almost like talking to a coach. Just, we know Pitt guys will have the effort. We know Pitt guys will play lights out. But it's the knowledge. It's the knowledge when you're talking about football and schematically. It's almost like not talking to a player. It's like talking to a coach. And I think it's one of the best things that an NFL scout can really say to a player is, man, this guy knows football. His football IQ is where it needs to be. So really, and I think in the linebacker room, you'll have those 4. Kyle Lewis, a younger linebacker, he's starting to step up. Braylon Lovelace, he's a guy that's really has a really good camp so far. Pat Narduzzi talked about, took a little bit of a step back in the spring practice game, their first scrimmage. That's pretty expected for a true freshman. I mean, if he had a perfect game as a true freshman, holy hell, I think this kid's going to be an absolute stud. But also, too, do not be surprised if you see a guy like Jordan Bass play this year. He's not on campus right now, but he will be in the summertime. Don't be surprised if you see him there as well. So really, you're looking between those 3 to 6 guys that are really the linebacker room. And Pat Narduzzi talked about today. Pat talked about how he's comfortable with that room, just like how he's comfortable with the DBs. In the safety room, you got Stephen Hall, Donovan McMillan, 2 guys that have been playing really well. P.J. O'Brien, he's been playing lights out in the high level. Now, Pat Narduzzi talked about today how he didn't like how he got an unsportsmanlike call. He was a little pissed off about. Just if P.J. can control himself, just in that term where it's an emotional game, man. At the end of the day, I like the emotional guys because one, they're so invested into the game, but you want to be able to narrow that down and keep it contained so you don't have those penalties in the game. You have those 2 guys. Javon McIntyre, a guy that's back there as well. For the safeties, I think there's going to be really your 4 guys back there that are going to be really rotating in. And, of course, a corner, you're going to have, A.J. Woods, M.J. Devonshire, Marquez Williams. Those 3 guys I think everybody knows about that are returning this year. Those guys will have a major role, tremendous cornerbacks. I mean, as a cornerback room, you got to be excited. You got to be pumped that those guys are back because they're all playmakers. Besides them, I think a name you'll be hearing about a lot is Rylan Gandy, a guy who has really, really played well, but just waited his turn. You look at Pitt's DB room; they've always been deep, always had depth, especially from Pat Narduzzi's 4th year and on when he's recruited his players. Crumpley, that's another guy who is finally starting to get it. Again, he's still a young guy, but it's kind of it's really starting to come together. So you look at them, you really look at those 5. That's going to be your that's going to be your cornerback room. M.J. Devonshire, A.J. Woods, Marquez Williams, Rylan Gandy, and Crumpley. You look at those guys; those are going to be really good cornerbacks, especially as the years go on and as this season goes on. It'll be kind of cool to see where Shadarian Harrison, what he does whenever he gets here. One of the top recruits in the 2023 class. And I keep, it's almost like I keep saying that too. I'm really happy where Pitt's recruiting has been. And people always talk about the rankings and stuff like that, especially when the season ends. Pitt knows how to find talent and they know how to develop talent. That's the difference between Pitt and 90% of these schools. The teams that are in the college football playoff, the Georgias, the Alabamas, they're able to develop players. Now, yes, they are recruiting the top elite talent, but they're also, those guys have talent, but they still got to develop them. Pitt and Clemson, those teams are really developing their players, and that's when you see teams like Pitt, for instance. You're looking at Kalijah Cansey. He's more than likely going to go in the first round. Those guys are developed. Kalijah Cansey being a low 3-star when he got here, and people talked about that coming out of Miami Northwestern. The guy worked his tail off, and guess what? He's going to be a potential first-round pick. I think he's going to be a first-round pick, and that comes due to hard work and where these guys have been. So, I look at overall right now through 7 practices, Pitt's in a damn good spot. You're finding out really who you have, what kind of depth do you have. They're really truly finding out what kind of team and collective do they have this year. I also think they're really looking out, and then they're kind of figuring out where 7 practices have really happened so far, and they're figuring out, okay, where our holes are still. I talked about before, wide receiver, tight end, and potentially if they really wanted to add someone veteran, wide receiver, tight end, and possibly linebacker, just to add one more veteran guy in there. We'd see. I don't know. Potentially, an offensive tackle. Maybe if they wanted to go get in a tackle because at the guard position they're really deep. A guy like Ryan Bayer is really stepping up this year. He's a guy that can play guard or tackle. I know he's competing really hard right now for one of the guard spots. We'll see if he wins one of these jobs, because when I look at it overall, just he's a guy that's going to be a damn good player, man. He plays the way he did this past year, just in the short amount of snaps he had. Imagine him out there 24/7 as a starter. I look at that kid, and you can just notice when you have talent. When you're a true freshman on the offensive line, and just especially perfect example was the Virginia game. He went out there and just absolutely mauled people, just absolutely destroyed them. For as far as tape goes, you're just absolutely just wrecking people. And when you just come off the bench and you're going into a game and you're just manhandling people like that, imagine now in year 2 where he's competing and he's moving people at will. You know what I mean? It's a pleasure to watch him play. I think he's going to be a tremendous player and one of the next great offensive linemen to come out, especially too when you have Taylor playing left tackle, Ryan Bayer that's there. You'll have Jay Cradle, Blake Subovic, Matt Gonsalves, and just the depth goes on and on. I just think overall you're looking at this roster and it's deep. It's deep at this point where you have guys who can play multiple positions. You got guys that are layered in depth behind guys. And I think really the 2 questions, if they went into the season right now, would be how well would the wide receiver room adjust with the guys they have, and where would the tight end room be? But overall, I look at this roster right now, and I'm damn happy, and especially how spring practice is going. So, again, guys, please, if you have not done so already, subscribe to the channel. Please leave a comment down below. Talk about some of the topics and talked about here in the video, but more importantly, especially during the show. But also, too, what are some of the topics that you want to hear about, especially from spring practice or the next video that's coming up about the commits that currently have committed to Pitt? Talk a little bit about those. And also, too, I'm going to try to get a live going sometime this week so where I can answer questions live directly. But this allows me to really just record the show, get it out there, really talk about what's really going on with Pitt, especially in spring practice. But extremely excited. Guys, again, please subscribe, like, comment, please, and then share it with your friends. The more and more people we have the conversation, the better the conversations are. Again, can't do anything without you guys and the Pitt fans supporting the channel. Thank you for everyone out there, especially from conference realignment talks, some ACC, the amount of ACC followers I have, Notre Dame. thank you guys as well. We'll get back to a lot of those topics as well. So again, thank you guys for everything you do. As always and forever, cheer on the ACC, root for Miami in the Final Four, but also now and forever, Hail to Pitt. I'll see you guys.